Good morning. First, I would be remiss if I didn't thank Congressman Robert Pittenger. It's an honor and a privilege to be, this is, I believe, my 6th forum that I've been able to take a part of, and I've seen the forum literally grow in the years despite the pandemic. This forum has been able to take me to places as far away as Latvia, as close by as Panama, and many countries in between. And I think the cooperation among all you, especially the legislators that are in the room, I think is the key ingredient that makes these forums so successful. Usually when I participate in the forum, I'm mostly talking about issues that are related to international terrorism or illicit finance. But in this specific forum, I asked Congressman Pittenger if I could be on the panel of human trafficking, and Ann so kindly agreed, because of exactly what they were saying, that I've noticed over time that human trafficking is often viewed from the lens of a humanitarian issue, but I'm a national security expert. I direct a national security think tank, and what we've become to realize is that human trafficking is absolutely a national security issue, and it's embedded with many different elements of transnational organized crime. So let me begin by talking a little bit about immigration here in the United States. In case you haven't heard, we are experiencing a tremendous crisis at our U.S. southern border. There are upwards of 1.7 million encounters and apprehensions this year alone, fiscal year 2021, on the U.S. southern border. That is a record number since this data has been collected since 1960. This has been the highest year to date in terms of encounters and apprehensions at the border. We're talking upwards of about 7,000 migrants per day, which is 4 times the capacity that we have at our border, which you can imagine there is a tremendous amount of people that aren't getting screened or aren't getting checked in. And there's a specific phenomenon that's happening at the border that has specifically to do with human trafficking, which is a phenomenon not necessarily new, but it's become more visible over the years, which is a lexicon among the Department of Homeland Security, which is the term special interest alien, or the acronym is SIA. What this term means, this is government jargon, what this term means is these are irregular migrants that are traveling from all parts of the world, but specifically 35 countries that have a high density of presence of terrorist organizations. That doesn't mean that if you are classified an SIA by the Department of Homeland Security that you are necessarily a terrorist. What it means is that there's a possibility that you can be induced or manipulated by a terrorist organization because you come from a country where the terrorist organization has a prominent presence. This country listing means you get additional screening measures, biometrics and others, to be able to detect your identity and ensure that you aren't a member or working with these international terrorist groups. Within this realm of SIAs, we've seen a tremendous surge over the last 4 years, particularly at our U.S. southern border. And we've seen that coming within the realm in the region of Latin America. U.S. Southern Command, which is the combatant command responsible for Latin America and the Department of Defense, according to their most recent posture statement before the U.S. Senate, as of last year, 2020, during the pandemic, the United States law enforcement and our regional partners arrested 66 human smuggling facilitators. These facilitators get upwards of about $350 million a year in the operation of human trafficking. They earn upwards of $10,000 to $50,000 per migrant, and this is a tremendous business that is now booming and creating some of the push factors that's driving the migration to our southern border. What I'd like to do for today, for the few minutes that I have here in front of you, is to talk about a specific case study that at my center we are investigating, and this is the first time that I'll be presenting this case study publicly. We will be having a report that will be forthcoming early next year, and it has to do with human trafficking, but it has to do with human trafficking that's aided and abetted by specific governments. In this case, we're talking about the government of Venezuela. A little context for those that are unfamiliar with Venezuela. Venezuela is the largest humanitarian crisis in the Western Hemisphere. It has the second largest refugee outflows in the world, second to only Syria. There have been more than 6 million Venezuelan migrants or refugees that have left that country since 2014, and that number keeps growing. And Venezuela's government, or more specifically the regime of Nicolas Maduro, has turned the country into a regional epicenter of transnational organized crime. We've been looking at Venezuela for more than a decade, and in this research that we've done at our center, we came across many state institutions within the Venezuelan government that are involved or either embedded with transnational criminal organizations. One in specific is really concerning for us, which is the State Immigration Agency. It goes by the name of SAIME. We first caught wind of SAIME, the Venezuelan State Immigration Agency, about 10 years ago when we uncovered an immigration security scheme where the state institution, the State Immigration Agency in Venezuela, SAIME, was issuing government-issued national identification documents to suspected members of international terrorist organizations, more specifically, suspected members of Hezbollah. This research that we published a report in 2014 was later confirmed in 2016 by the Department of Homeland Security, and then later in 2017 was a feature in a joint investigation with CNN. So we started to understand that this immigration agency, understand this in the context of most immigration agencies in the world, their job is to protect their citizens in their sovereign territory from the presence of international terrorist groups. In this case, this immigration agency in Venezuela was inviting international terrorist groups to keep presence inside their country and potentially provide them with false identification that would allow them to proliferate in other parts of the region or even the world. More recently, we are now seeing the same Venezuelan State Immigration Agency, SAIME, involved in potential human trafficking of Venezuelans. The scheme is very simple, and for lack of time, I'm going to give it a very short description. It's a 5-step process. The first step is SAIME, the immigration agency, contacts human smuggling facilitators that have long-standing established connections in Mexico. Step 2, for a fee of approximately $5,000, SAIME issues a new passport to these Venezuelan migrants and organizes the travel, usually a flight, to Mexico. Once purchased, SAIME connects with Venezuela's state-owned airline, Conviasa, and ensures that these Venezuelan migrants get placed on a flight manifest. Step 4, upon arriving in Mexico, these Venezuelan migrants are connected to human smuggling facilitators who segment the migrants by age, gender, and whether they're traveling with a family or as an individual unit, who then arrange their trip across the U.S. southern border. The final step, step 5, the new passports that were just issued in Venezuela to these migrants, which in some cases could be fraudulent passports, are then shipped to the United States at the address to where the migrants are supposed to pick them up once they cross the border. Now, as you can imagine, with the density of numbers that we're talking about, 6 million since 2014, this creates a tremendous industry for these human smuggling facilitators and a tremendous opportunity for adversarial nations to democracies worldwide to be able to use migration more than just a crime, an illicit activity, but use it as a strategic weapon to be able to weaken democracies and sovereignties around the world. I'll end with a concept that this describes. And one of the things we do at our center at SFS is we try to apply academic and theoretical concepts to understand how these different types of illicit activities are shaping our national security landscape. Within this, and this I 100% agree with what my colleagues on the panel were saying, that human trafficking is really at the epicenter of many different threat networks and threat streams that are converging. If we go back 20 years, here in the United States, there was a lot of debate about whether transnational criminal organizations and international terrorist organizations were going to ever align. Most analysts believed that they would never align because they have different strategic objectives. One is motivated by profits, the other is motivated by political causes. This is true, and this is mostly the case. However, we've seen a tremendous convergence of terrorist organizations, criminal organizations, and at the epicenter of that is human smuggling facilitators, because they're not aligned because of objectives, they're aligned because of logistics. Put this very simply, if you are a facilitator for an international terrorist organization, you are a good candidate to be a facilitator for a transnational criminal organization because you're already operating in that illicit underworld. In the Defense Department, this is called threat convergence, and more specifically, these logistical networks are defined by the 3 Fs, which are fixers, financiers, and facilitators. And if we look at the convergence as a Venn diagram, you would have 2 overlapping circles: transnational criminal organizations, international terrorism, human trafficking would follow in the shaded area in between. And what I would propose is that you add a 3rd circle, which are criminalized states or specific governments that are facilitating these activities. And this leads to my final remarks about my policy recommendations. And I know Ann has asked us to talk about this, and I'm sure we'll talk more on the Q&A. But my policy recommendation is very simple, and it's simply only 2. One for our United States representatives that are in the room, and another for our international parliamentarians. For our international parliamentarians, it's time that we look at human trafficking as a whole of government issue that involves all the elements and institutions involved with your national security. Human trafficking is, as was mentioned, an illicit activity that's tied to illicit finance, but it also can be used as a strategic weapon to be able to debilitate border security, weaken national sovereignty, and ultimately dismantle democracies. Here in the United States, there's efforts to be able to look at human trafficking as part of transnational criminal activity, and then look at convergence as threat networks that operate worldwide. And my final recommendation is for our representatives from the U.S. Congress. I recommend that you start to examine whether Venezuela, more specifically the government of Venezuela, should be considered a country of special interest by the Department of Homeland Security. Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate it.